Salutations from space and aloha from Earth, friends. Happy Easter to you. We're looking here at an Easter chart, but when is Easter? I cast the chart for 6:42 a.m. because that's when the sun was on the rise today, when the sun was crossing the horizon. The sun was on that cross that separates the invisible, right, below the ground, and the visible above the ground. And the sun is on that cross as it is every day. So that's locally here where I'm currently sitting in Richmond, California. It was 6:42 a.m. today, about sunrise. But that's not the same as sunrise where you're sitting, right? So an interesting thing about these holy days, the way that we're working with them today, like Christmas, like Easter, or in other traditions like Passover, Rosh Hashanah, right? We can't really cast a chart for the moment of the magical happening. What is the magical happening? Let me show you some pictures from some presentations I've built so we can look into the sacred astronomical foundations of these holy days called Passover and Easter. And maybe we'll speak a bit about Christmas too. Okay, to the pretty pictures. So I like to call my work sacred astronomy. The idea, generally speaking, is that astrology is so much more than some symbolic language alone. Astrology is the poetic breath of nature. And when we re-nature our craft, how do we do this? Simply by engaging with the living sky and celebrating the marriage of heaven and earth, even living as vows to that union. By having an embodied, sentient, sensual experience in nature with the heavens and the earth, we re-nature our craft. And when we do so, the idea of sacred astronomy is this is how we will remember the roots of the astrological rules we use, the proofs of the astrological equations we use. That these come from somewhere, and that they're not just from human nature, but from earth nature and heaven's nature, from the natural world. That's the general idea of sacred astronomy. So if I watch the sun setting every evening and see that the sun sets at a different place on the horizon, and then I could keep a calendar in this way. I could say, from my point of view, right here, the sun will set into Mount Tamalpais only when it's in about 10 degrees Pisces and therefore also 20 degrees of Libra. This is, I believe, the way that the ancients were connecting to the sky, in some ways out of necessity, like to keep an agricultural calendar. If you like food, this is a necessary thing to do, at least in an agricultural society, when in many regards our modern calendars were born. We have to work with nature, with astronomy. These days, we just ask clocks and calendars to do all of that for us. So some of these images I'm going to show to you are from recent presentations that I've given about the turning of the ages and the sun on the cross and the importance of the coming June solstice annular eclipse in June 20th, 2020 or 21st, depending on where you are, in the center of the sacred hoop on the hand of the high man at the galactic cross. And this is a very powerful thing that's happening. We're in a window of once in about every 26,000 years where the height of the northern hemisphere light anyway is aligned to this galactic cross in the center of the sacred hoop, the place from which our souls come. And that's a tale for another time. If you wish, you could go to my website, to geminibrett.com, and check out a movie called 2020 Revelations. And I'll show you some of that, the sun on the galactic cross, and how this is in this way, a happening that comes around only once every great year, the great year being about 26,000 years long. So some astronomical confirmation of what we feel to be true in our bones. We have incarnated at very special times. Not to get egoic about that, but to take some responsibility. That's the idea of this film on my website at geminibrett.com that you can see, called 2020 Revelations. The sun on the galactic cross once every great year. But the sun is also on this cross of the eastern horizon every day, and the sun is on a cross every year. And that's going to bring us into what I want to share today, the sacred astronomy foundations of these annual holy days, like Christmas and Easter, or in another tradition, a previous tradition, we could say Passover. So this calendar thing that we're using now is kind of strange, right? Like, why are our months not tuned to the moon and the sun, right? Why don't we start a new month with new moon? Wouldn't that make sense? Well, some cultures have, right? This is how the Jewish calendar works, for example, and it is a remnant of the Babylonian calendar, which had preceded it. This is how the Chinese solely lunar calendar works. There are many other solely lunar calendars. There are some issues with them, and we'll speak about calendar calisthenics a little bit when we get to the timings of Passover, okay? But as I said earlier, a weird thing about these holidays is astrologers can't cast a chart, right? I mean, I can cast a chart for Easter Day today, the Sunday after the full moon, right? Dig that, right? Sunday, the day of the sun, right? Where Monday is the day of the moon, and Tuesday, Martes, is the day of Mars, and Wednesday, Miércoles, is the day of Mercury, and Thursday, Jueves, is the day of Jupiter, and Friday, Viernes, the day of Venus, Saturday, the day of Saturn, and Sunday is the day of the sun, right? So interestingly, the way that we do Easter now, and this isn't how it's always been done, and some don't even do it this way still today. Some celebrate Easter on a different day than others do. You may know these truths, right? But the way that, is most commonly accepted is that Easter is the Sunday, the day of the sun. Why? Because it's about the sun. It's about the Son of God, or the Son of Man, as Jesus called himself, which I will suggest, and I'm not the first to, is the sun in your sky. It's when the sun was on the cross. Well, which cross? Is that something in the sky too? And I will show you that, yes, this is true. So interestingly, the way that we do Easter now, it's not so much about when the sun is on the cross. I'll show you when that was and when that will be again, and why the crucifixion, the sun on the cross, happened on the day after Passover, and what Passover is astronomically too, because this is about the sun on the cross, and why as you may know in the Passover tradition. Why this word? Because the houses of the Jews were passed over, in a sense, by the Holy Ghost that came sweeping through Egypt at this time to claim the firstborn of every household. And it wasn't just the houses, right? The calves died, the firstborn calf to a mother and father, bull and cow, I guess. So the children of the flocks, and the human children too, except for those whose parents had heard the news and knew the way for their house to be passed over would be to put the blood of the ram above the door. So what is that? Why the ram? Why the ram's blood? Why the door? And why is this Passover? Is it because that death passed over these houses? Or is there something rooted in the sacred astronomy of the thing to this too? Well, if we want to tune into 2020 vision, how could I not use that cliche that so many of us have for this year, although it certainly feels like we have our vision impaired or obscured right now. But this is all part of it. Part of the way for us to have the revelation, to see, part of us, the way for us to have the unveiling, the apocalypse, if you will, which doesn't mean the end of the world. It just might be the end of the world as you know it, if we choose to open our eyes to something that has previously existed beyond the veil. And the ancients have known and shown and left tied into the tales of old in the scriptures, ways to remind us that the messages will be seen in the heavens, the seasons and the signs, which is why we're told these lights, the sun and the moon, were created, right? Okay. So what a weird thing that we don't start a month, a new month, with a new moon. Obviously, month takes its etymological root from moon, which basically, by the way, relates back to blood. Why? Menses, yes? The great cycle of life, of creation. And for us to hear more about that magic, we better listen to our sisters and our mothers and the keepers of birth. Okay. So regardless, in this weird Gregorian thing that we do, like I also can't show you I can't show you a chart for the new year, right? We start our years on January 1st. Not something that's aligned to the earth and the sun. Well, what are earth and sun alignments? These are solstices, equinoxes. I mean, really every day, right? Like today we're looking at 23 degrees Aries. Earth sees sun in 23 degrees Aries. That will happen again a year from now. That's not the Passover, by the way. That's not the sun on the cross. Because we've slipped from celebrating Easter to this astronomical happening. It's close. Let's bring that sun and moon back in, right? Because as I was saying before, it's interesting that now most are celebrating Easter on Sunday, the day of the sun, after full moon, right? So we bring sun, moon, and earth, the lunation in. The day of the sun, Sunday, after full moon, after March equinox, which is an earth sun thing, an annual thing. And March equinox, okay, which we see like astrologically, when the sun enters the tropical sign of Aries, that I can cast a chart for. In astrology, we call this the Aries ingress. And in many regards, we speak to this as the chart for the year. So what an interesting thing that astrology chooses to begin the year with March equinox, when the sun enters, moves through the door, the gate, passes over. I'll show you why that is. But when it ingresses or enters the sign of Aries, the tropical sign of Aries, which of course has traditional connections with the ram. Okay, so I can cast a chart for the moment that the sun moves into the tropical sign of Aries. I'm going to show you the directional phenomena behind this. Because when I say sacred astronomy is celebrating the poetic breath of nature, with a tropical zodiac that most Western astrologers like myself utilize, some call the seasonal zodiac, and it is seasonal, but we have to be careful. When we say this, many will teach that, for example, Aries is the first sign because March equinox, when the sun enters Aries, this is the resurrection. This is when light overcomes night. This is spring equinox, right? And so now days will begin growing longer than nights are. Well, that's a hemispheric thing, isn't it? Because of course, in the southern hemisphere now, nights are longer than day. Because March equinox, the sun's tropical Aries ingress, for the southern hemisphere means autumnal equinox, right? And for the northern hemisphere, spring equinox. So when we say, as many will teach, that Aries begins the year, sun ingress Aries is the beginning of the year because light overcomes night, this is the true resurrection, to be careful with that. Or we could say the rebirthing of the sun, if you will. Well, when do we celebrate the birth of the sun? Christmas, right? And oddly, this is not an astronomical event either. What do we say about Christmas? It's December 25th. Okay. Do you know that's the first day of Christmas? Like these days, we tend to think of the 12 days of Christmas are building up to Christmas. So those 12 days of like, you know, consumerism crazy. And traditionally, Christmas is the first day of Christmas. And that is leading to the 12th day of Christmas, which is Epiphany, right? So the child was born, we were told. The son was born on Christmas Day. And on the 12th day was revealed, right? The Epiphany was when the shepherds, when the wise men, when the sages, when the astrologers, if you will, saw the child had been born. And, you know, in many of the Latin cultures, like in Spain, Three Kings Day, Tres Reyes, like that's in a sense, well, more than in a sense, that's the bigger day, right? That's like when you exchange the presents and things. And that's like January 6th. That's the 12th day of Christmas, right? In between these two, December 25th and January 6th, the first and the 12th days of Christmas, the middle point is January 1st. So I think it's very likely that is why we are celebrating New Year at that time. Now, that being said, let's honor that this is a remnant from a calendar which was said to exist before Christ, right? The Julian calendar, or did it? So looking into calendar calisthenics, looking into the advent of the Julian calendar, which created these new months from a 10-month system to a 12-month system that now included August, Augustus, and July, Julius, right? But still, we start with Janus, right? Janus, the god, the two-faced god, one looking back to the year that preceded and one looking forward to the year that will come. January. There's a lot of clues waiting for those who choose to look into the mystery of the history of the calendar calisthenics, and also look to when the Julian calendar became Gregorianized. Why? Because Easter had slipped from the equinox. Why? Because we were at the time, the Julian calendar celebrated years of 365 and 1/4 days, but we found out that that's not right. And the Gregorian calendar made some adjustments. First of all, it just took 10 days out of a year so it could recalibrate Easter towards equinox, back towards the Passover. And now we understand that the year is not 365 and 1/4, but more like 365.242199 and change. And I digress, but calendar calisthenics are imperative if we want to understand the sacred astronomical foundations of these holy days, of Christmas when the sun is born, of Easter when the sun is on the cross and is reborn, of Passover. And we could go on, but let's stick with those today. And I will show you why they are connections in one regard, at least when we speak Passover, because the Jewish calendar is solely lunar. It is a calendar that celebrates months, new months beginning with new moons, unlike, the Gregorian calendar used in much of the world today, which is configured to annual dates. And the annual happening, right, the yearly happening, this is about the Earth's orbit of the sun. Or from Earth's point of view, the sun's orbit of you, right? The sun moving through your sky about 1 degree per day, traveling through the 12 the 12 signs. Okay. But, if I said, okay, sun ingress Aries, that's a moment. And regardless of where you live, that's happening in the night, as it did in California on March 19th of 2020, or if that's happening in your early morning, as it did halfway around the world, it's still the same moment, right? When I say December solstice, whether that means winter solstice for you in the northern hemisphere or summer solstice for you in the southern hemisphere, that winter solstice, which we tropical astrologers see as the sun's ingress Capricorn, and the only day of the year when the sun is seen directly above the Tropic of Capricorn, right? That's a moment in time. And so whether that's happening for you at sunrise or the middle of the day or sunset, that depends on where you are on Earth, but it is an arrangement of the Earth and the sun directionally that is a moment in time. And so I can cast a chart. We call this Capricorn ingress in mundane astrology, using the tropical zodiac, which is not only a zodiac of the seasons. Again, we have to be careful because seasonal opposition between the northern and the southern hemisphere. This is one issue that astrology must face. And when we do, we find our way to the truth that the tropical zodiac in tropical astrology, like so many wisdom systems of shamanic cultures, is a system based upon the energies of the cardinal directions. And these directions are all about the sun and the earth. So in the sacred astronomy of calendar calisthenics, it's really all about the 3 parts of the philosophy of the whole world: spirit, soul, and matter, circle, crescent, and cross, sun, moon, and earth. I can't cast a chart for the new year from a Gregorian point of view. When is January 1st? Do I look at 12 midnight here in Richmond, California, where I'm sitting, and we went from December 31st, 2019 to January 1st. Well, these days, I don't really head out to New Year's parties. And I tend to fall asleep earlier anyway, so maybe I'll turn on the TV and watch the ball drop in New York, right? Because 12 a.m. in New York is 9 p.m. over here. It's like a little bit easier to stay in my current kind of energetic setting. Is that New Year's? Well, that's hours after New Year's at the Greenwich Meridian, where we choose to define time these days. And that's a pretty new convention to say that Greenwich in the United Kingdom near London is like the center point. But interestingly, it's also the center point. So in the way that we're doing time now, like the earliest place, the place that first experiences the new year is halfway on the other side of the world from Greenwich. Interestingly, one of the first places whose calendar will move from December 31st to January 1st is called Christmas Island. Check it out. So why not celebrate New Year at solstice or at an equinox? Why this January 1st thing? I mean, you heard my rap. I feel like perhaps it's because it's the time between Christmas, December 25th, and Epiphany, Three Kings Day, January 6th. But either way, when on January 1st? When did Easter begin? We say it's the Sunday after the full moon after March equinox. Well, your Sunday likely began before mine did, unless you're in Hawaii, which is one of the only places in our current consciousness of day and night, or at least calendar system. Hawaii is one of the only places that will turn the page after California does. We're pretty late in the game here in California. The world spins from the west to the east, which is why the sun rises on the east coast of a continent before it does on the west coast of a continent. So time is all about this spinning of the earth in day, about this orbiting of the earth. And tropical astrology, the tropical zodiac, the very real astronomy of the tropical zodiac is built upon the interface of the planes of day, Earth spin, and the plane of year, Earth orbit of the sun. Well, how does the moon come in? It doesn't. But it does in lunar calendars, those that begin new months with new moons. That makes sense, doesn't it? But keeping a lunar calendar and a pure solar calendar is a tricky thing to do. We have to drop deep into calendar calisthenics, deeper than we will today. I mentioned that sun, moon, and earth. I called them by this phrase, the three parts of the philosophy of the whole world. Well, that comes from Hermes' emerald tablets. Let's talk about the year. Okay. Thanks to my love, Anna, for helping me create this illustration of the year, of the sun through the signs. This may seem strange to you because you see June solstice and then you see Capricorn. It's like, wait, what? But it's about where the earth is seeing the sun, okay? So when the earth sees the sun moving from the signs of Sagittarius to Capricorn, this is December solstice. I hope that makes sense. Imagine the earth being here. We see the sun in Leo. halfway between June solstice and September equinox, right? Or we're here today, the sun is in late, the earth is over here, so we see the sun in late Aries. I hope that makes sense. Well, that's strange. Look at that Sagittarius glyph. And what it depicts is this: the earth, whose rotational axis, which I like to call the spine of Gaia, or the sword of our stone, or the world tree, that axis of our rotation and that plane of our rotation, which is the equator of Earth, yeah, that's the daily motion, the spinning of Earth, that's tilted in respect to the plane of our orbit by about 23.5 degrees. See that in the Sagittarius glyph? Here's the pole. It's always pointing north and south, okay? And here's the plane, that would be our equator. You can see it here, tilted in respect to our orbital path, which is the path of the year, right? So as Earth spins, day, sunrise, sunset, day and night, the most powerful change we'll ever experience. And the second most being the annual change of the seasons, which happens when the Earth is orbiting the sun, or from Earth's point of view, the sun is moving about us in the course of a year through the signs, right? So as Earth moves from this place at December solstice time and continues on, that arrow you can see will then move through Capricorn, Aquarius, Pisces, etc. We'll see this in another image in a bit. But one thing I want to point out to you is how this is a directional phenomenon. The Earth's axis, which is our axis of rotation, always leans north. In our day and age, it always points to Polaris, North Star, Pole Star. Where the sun is in respect to that axis changes what's happening for us in the seasons, right? So when we see the shadow here at December solstice, north of the Arctic Circle, the sun never rises, and south of the Antarctic Circle, the sun never sets. The opposite is true at June solstice, right? Where north of the Arctic Circle, the sun never sets, and south of the Antarctic Circle, the sun never rises. The shadow will always be perpendicular to the sun. At equinox time, the shadow is actually aligned to the poles. Can't see that here in this illustration. But what I want you to see is that at June solstice, this is the only moment in the year, which is Earth about sun. It's the only moment in the year where the northern axis is leaning towards the sun. Hence summer solstice for the northern hemisphere, winter solstice for the southern hemisphere. But this is very important. It is the time when the sun is north of Earth. And the only moment of the year until next year when the sun is north of Earth, just as at December solstice, the sun is south of Earth. It's when the southern side of Gaia's spine, of our spin axis, of our world tree, it's when the southern is on the lean towards the sun, and hence summer solstice in the southern hemisphere and northern solstice, summer solstice in the northern hemisphere. No, sorry. Summer solstice in the southern hemisphere, winter solstice in the northern hemisphere. Now we celebrate the birth of the sun, the birth of Christ, 4 days after this time about, right? Because usually December solstice, which is winter solstice for the northern hemisphere, is December 21st. Because of the Gregorian leap day weirdness, it can be the 20th or the 22nd. And that's something I can cast a chart for. I can cast a chart for when the sun moves from Sagittarius into Capricorn. Whether that's happening at midday for these cats on Earth or midnight for these cats on this side of the Earth, it's still a moment in time based upon the Earth orbiting the sun. This is astronomy, right? This is sacred astronomy. This is the poetic breath of nature, because there's going to be an energetic experience of this called, for some of us, the longest night, and some of us the longest day. But very importantly, another way we can express that is the sun is south of the Earth. And for the northern hemisphere, of course, this means now the longest night is done and we are starting to climb, right, towards the light. Yes? The sun is born. And this is why, of course, it's not only the Christian tradition, which is aligned the birth of a solar avatar, in this case, Christ, to this time of December solstice. Horus, Mithras, many have been born at the time of December solstice because that is when the sun is born out of the darkness. You know, it's a fascinating thing that we begin our days in the middle of the night. Yeah. Well, we begin our years in the middle of the night too. And this is a northern hemisphere thing, right? Because it is in the northern hemisphere when December solstice, about 10 days before the calendar flipped January 1st, it really should be celebrated at December solstice, you know, or we should maybe even say winter solstice. If you want to celebrate your years to the birth of the sun, to when the light is born in the longest night. And of course, this is also when we begin our days, because the middle of the night is when the sun begins its climb from the darkness, okay, to its midday height. Seasonally, that would be like December solstice, the middle of the night of the year, the longest night of the year. And summer solstice, sorry, I should say winter solstice and summer solstice, the height of the light, right? That's like the midday of the year, right? Where autumnal equinox is like sunset. And spring equinox is like sunrise. But what we're going to see is why it's also the sun on the cross. So, of course, a culture that's beginning its year, and this was defined in the Northern Hemisphere, right? This is a Vatican thing that we are tied into. I mean, I think it's fascinating that now, you know, it's accepted to call BC BCE instead of before Christ, before Common Era, and instead of Ada Domini, you know, which many then called after death. That's not what it means. It's like after the birth of Christ. Now we're saying, you know, CE instead of AD, Common Era. We'll call a spade, friends. If you're celebrating a calendar that is coordinated and calibrated to the mythic idea of the Christian religion, why do you want to call BC before Common Era? Switch your calendar. Your calendar is configured and it's to the sacred astronomy. So that's where I want to like open our eyes to like the mysteries of the earth and the sky, to see more than religiosity in some book. But I think it's kind of ridiculous to call AD CE just for science to try to get away from its Christian roots, you know? Start a new calendar. I actually propose that we do. Anyway, in the calendar that we use, in the Northern Hemisphere, we begin our years right around the longest night, December solstice. It's 10 days later, and it's a day, January 1st. I really can't cast a chart for, because January 1st on Christmas Island is like a whole day almost before it is in California. But December solstice, sun ingress Capricorn, now I can cast a chart for that, whether it's happening where you are this year in the middle of the day or the middle of the night. It's still a moment. It's the only moment of the year when the sun is south of the center of Earth, where we are all connected. And that, my friends, is where we measure the placement of the planets and the signs from the center of the Earth, the heart of Gaia, because that's where we Earthlings are all one. Okay. So if you're celebrating, as the Northern Hemisphere does, where this calendar was created, the beginning of the year and the longest night, why? Because now the sun is born out of the darkness and will begin to climb. Of course, you would start your days in the middle of the night, because December, let me say it this way, winter solstice is the middle of the year's night. All right. Well, what is sunrise? When we actually experience the truth that the sun has climbed from that invisible underworld back on its way to the height of the light at midday. Sunrise is like March equinox, right? And the earth here would see the sun due east. Easter. Well, let's look at this from a geocentric point of view. And we'll honor Hermes' caduceus staff, at least one of them, the snake around the pole. I'm going to show this many times. All right. Let me rewind. So here, let's go back actually. Heliocentric, obviously not to scale. The truth is the sun is bigger than the earth. Did you know? But heliocentric meaning sun-centered, which we know is true cosmology, right? True astronomy. Thanks to the Copernican revolution, taking back things that we knew long ago. Anyway, so here's Earth about the sun in the course of a year, right? So heliocentric, sun-centered, and again, Earth sees the sun. As Earth moves this way, we see the sun moving through the signs that way, okay? But now we're gonna like bring this back to Hermes, the caduceus staffs, and see this serpent, this snaking motion from Earth's point of view of what the sun does during the course of a year. All right. And I'll rewind this and we'll drop into it a bit. Now remember, let me just rewind. You see that arrow, okay? That's the sun moving west to east. This is called the secondary motion. While the spinning of the earth, the day, right? If the sun is right there, we spin once, that's sunrise and sunset. Like right here would be midday for like the east coast of the Americas. Or kind of midday above, like it looks like Venezuela. Okay, that's midnight, right? For cats who are on the other side of the globe at the time. Cats over here, like Hawaii, are spinning into the light in the same moment. That's like sunrise. And over here in Africa and Europe, it's like sunset in the same moment, right? That's all relative to your surface. But let's speak about this from the center of the earth where we are all connected. Now, because the northern axis leans always towards this cusp of tropical Gemini and Cancer, solstice, tropikos was the Greek word for the turnaround points. The southern axis is always leaning, and let's go back again. The northern axis is always leaning towards the cusp of Gemini and Cancer. That's harder to see here, but the truth is it's not, the zodiac's not surrounding the sun, it's surrounding the earth. So if you can just bring this circle around the earth, right? And it doesn't move, like the sun is moving through Earth's zodiac, it's just much easier to see that from a geocentric point of view because we live on Earth. And so that's why we go here, okay? And this is what the sun does from our point of view during the course of the year. Now the earth would be spinning 365.242199 times during that happening. All right. Let's talk about this from this geocentric point of view. Earth-centered. Our experience, most of the charts that we astrologers cast are geocentric. The center of Earth is the center of the chart. We should be Earth-centric. We need to be more Earth-centric, don't we? The northern axis of the Earth is always leaning towards the cusp of Gemini and Cancer, and so I can call that North Point. The southern axis of the Earth is always leaning towards the cusp of tropical Sagittarius and Capricorn, so I can call that the South Point. This is the directional truth of the tropical zodiac. The West Point is cusp of Virgo and Libra. And that's why Libra looks like a sunset, that glyph, because sunset is the energy of the West, okay? And certainly not for everywhere on Earth at the same time, only for locations on a line, but from the center of the Earth where we are all connected, when the sun ingresses Libra, it is due west of the center, and that's why Libra glyph is configured to look like the setting sun, because the setting sun is the image of the west. The rising sign is the image of the east. So why this Aries glyph? Why these ram's horns? Let's get to that. But I want to talk about this as a snake, okay? So what you'll see, and this is by what's called declination. So you can see here as I allow this animation I made to play, you will see that the longitude is moving from 0 to 30 degrees Aries, where it becomes 1 degree Taurus, and then Gemini and Cancer. These are tropical signs, okay? But you also see the declination moving from 0, okay, which happens only at equinox, and either equinox, okay, because declination is a measurement north or south of the celestial equator. The celestial equator, it's easier to see here in this image, is the plane of Earth's rotation. Yeah, the spine of our rotation is the rotational axis, the pole, which always points to north and south. It defines the directions, and the tropical zodiac is tied to that pole. It is a directional phenomena. Declination is a measurement north or south of the celestial equator, the plane of our rotation. The celestial equator, which I call the circle of matter because it's the circle of the Earth, is simply the Earth's equator projected out into space. So celestial equator, okay? And I hope you can see here that it's perpendicular to, it's the plane of our rotation, right? Our daily motion, the primary motion, right? Well, that's not the plane on which the sun sits. Why? Sagittarius glyph, right? Our rotational plane is tilted in respect to our orbital plane by an angle of about 23.5 degrees. It's really 23.4. If you measure that from here, it's 666. Oops, sorry, let's not go there right now into that number of the sun. Anyway, this is why we see the light as he moves through the signs, why we see the sun climbing and declining, okay? Snaking above and below the celestial equator. So here's 0 declination, here's maximum south declination, and here's 0 declination again. We'll watch that again, and now you can track this if you want. I'll point out to you, and maybe I can just pause this thing. Let's see. I don't think I can. We'll just watch it a few times. Here's 0 declination. Now look at this, okay? And what I want you to see is when the sun gets to Cancer, this is in the tropical zodiac, when it gets to the north point, what you're going to see is the declination gets to about 23.5 degrees north. Well, that's on Earth, the Tropic of Cancer. And when the sun gets to Capricorn, you'll see this declination is here, like 23.5 south. Well, that's the Tropic of Capricorn, okay? When the sun ingresses Cancer, it is shining directly above the Tropic of Cancer. When the sun ingresses Capricorn, it is shining directly above the Tropic of Capricorn, and then the goat starts climbing the mountain. All right, so let's look at that. For the Northern Hemisphere's point of view, of course, the Cancer ingress is summer solstice, the longest day. You see how the sun is very north, and then it starts to decline. And the lowest midday sun in our sky, December solstice for the Northern Hemisphere. And that's when the goat begins to climb again, you see? Or when we could say the sun is born. All right, so here there's northern signs, the northern extreme, this is declination. And now southern signs, the southern extreme, The goat begins to climb the mountain, and then the ram's horns. Why the ram's horns? So this time I'll just direct your gaze here. This is just looking at declination, basically as an annual sine wave, right? The sun always on the ecliptic, which is the plane of the year. That's Earth's orbital plane of the sun, or from our point of view, the sun's orbital plane of the Earth, right? So in declination, we can just see the sun snaking above and below, or at least we could say north of and south of, to be more global, the plane of our rotation. And at equinox time, we're unlike June solstice, ingress Cancer, the sun shines over the Tropic of Cancer, or Capricorn ingress, when the sun shines over the Tropic of Capricorn. Where is the sun shining directly above on Earth at the time of equinox? The equator, right? Why? Because this is one of the only 2 times of the year. The other is when the sun is due west of the center of Earth, 0 declination at the celestial equator there. And here from the southern signs is when the sun is passing over the celestial equator, moving north, which of course for the northern hemisphere means the resurrection, light overcoming night. Well, can you see the sun on the cross? Can you see the sun passing over the plane? So this is the sacred astronomical root of these holidays that celebrate the sun on the cross and Passover. You feel me? Does that seem like some invention? Or does that seem like the poetic breath of nature, as well as a reminder that the ancients were very aware of this somewhat simple, actually very simple astronomy? In fact, they were more aware of it than we are today, because the astronomers today are using these long telescopes to look long ago and far away, rather than narrowing their vision. And it's cool, the things they're finding, but forgetting to use the scopes of our eyes, lay on the grass and open to the sky and witness the marriage of heaven and earth, which is what I call sacred astronomy. And it's the astronomy of the ancients. And this is the very real astronomy of the tropical zodiac, which is a directional happening. We can say a seasonal happening. Again, we want to be careful because, of course, the seasonal opposition between northern and southern hemisphere. This is the time when, regardless of where you are on Earth, the sun is at this cross of the plane of the year, the ecliptic, where the sun always is, but crossing the celestial equator, which it only does at equinox. It does twice. It does at September equinox, right? And that's the resurrection of the sun for the southern hemisphere. And the sun passes over the celestial equator at March equinox. Well, interestingly, the Jewish calendar celebrates New Year with a moon happening that's configured to this, the sun to the west of the earth. Why? West is like sunset. The Jewish calendar celebrates months aligned with the moon. So new month begins with new moon. Now it once was the first visible new moon. The moon-sun conjunction is a no moon, not a new moon, unless it's an eclipse and you happen to be standing on Earth where a shadow is cast so that we see the moon occulting the sun disk, right? That's a pretty rare happening for a given location. Typically a new moon is a no moon. You don't see it. But the day after, sometimes too, depending on what time of your local day new moon aligned, the day after, you can see that sliver crescent in the west. And that's when you blow the ram's horn, right? And say, woo, a new month has begun. The moon has survived the meeting under the beams. So if you're beginning your months through a visible, sacred, astronomical, in nature, embodied experience of the birthing of the moon at sunset, yeah? If your month begins at sunset, that means your day begins at sunset. If your day begins at sunset, that means you're going to align the energies of your new year to the sunset of the year, which, of course, for the northern hemisphere, okay, is autumnal equinox, which is September equinox, which is Sun ingress Libra. Now, the Jewish calendar is not celebrating that new year, Rosh Hashanah, at September equinox. It's near there, right? But it also brings in the moon. Where are we in the months? And the thing is, if you're celebrating a calendar based on your new months with the new moons, every new moon aligns they're about separated by about 29 and a half days. That's a tricky thing to do. How are you going to have a 29 and a half day month? No, what you do is you have a 29-day month, a 30-day month, a 29-day month, a 30-day month, because then 2 months averages 29 and a half days. That's the sacred number 59, 29 and 30. Okay. The issue is 12 of those, this is the silver year, 12 times 29 and a half is 354 days. It's about 11 days shy of a golden year of the Earth Sun situation. So every now and then you have to throw in a leap month. And what's happening is you're not going to keep your holy days on these like annual calendar dates, right? Like Passover is not on some calendar date in the Gregorian annual sun calendar, Earth sun calendar. It's a Earth moon sun calendar configured to 354-day years with months thrown in to calibrate. It's a genius thing. Look into the Hebrew calendar. You will learn so much. Please. But this is why Passover is in Rosh Hashanah. These are equinox holidays, okay? These are directional holidays. The sunset of the year is the autumnal equinox, which for the northern hemisphere is September equinox. The sunrise of the year is spring equinox, which for northern hemisphere like Jerusalem is March equinox, Aries equinox, right? But if you're bringing in configurations of sun, moon, and earth, and you're going to do this at a new moon or a full moon, right? It's not always going to be when the sun passes over or when the sun is on the cross. That's an earth sun thing, right? 365.242199 days and change, right? That's the annual year, the earth orbiting the sun. But if you're going to bring the moon into this, who has a rhythm unto her own, 12 months is 354 days, right? So your calendar months are going to slip backwards through the annual year, and then you throw a month in to calibrate. And it takes 19 years for things to sync again. It's for some reason called the Metonic cycle after the Greek meton, although obviously the creators of the Babylonian calendar were very hip to the so-called Metonic cycle. I kind of digress, but for those of you who have been into the mysteries and the mysteries of sacred astronomy, which some would say that's science, not mystery. Sacred science, friends. Okay. So Easter, the Sunday, the magical day of the sun, the day of gold, the sun of our sky, the son of God, the son of man, if you will, after full moon, earth, moon, sun, after the astronomical sun on the cross, Passover, right? So Passover is configured around this time. Sun on the cross I mean, Easter configured around this time when the sun is passing over the celestial equator, as it does twice a year. And here for the Northern Hemisphere, the sunrise of the year, light being reborn, right? Born at December solstice for the Northern Hemisphere, of course, summer solstice, midday of the year, sunset of the year, and here's the birth of the sun from the longest night. And then the sun is on the cross and reborn because now light overcomes night. So really just be aware that that's a Northern Hemisphere trip. Well, this calendar was defined in this religion of a solar calendar about their solar avatar. It's not CE, Common Era, friends, it's AD, you know? If you're going to use the Christian calendar, you might as well, use the Christian terms or create a new calendar. There's many ways we could do this, better ways we could do this. Why don't we use a calendar configured to the months? Well, that's tricky because then you get a 354-day year, and that's hard to do agricultural with. You need leap months or whatever. But if you study the Hebrew calendar, you will see the genius of the linking of Earth, Moon, and Sun, and Earth, Sun, of the month and the year. All right. So the sun on the cross. Well, why do we call it Easter? I'm trying to remember if I get to the right place here. This is why. Let's go back here. So this, I'm looking at December solstice, okay? So you see the arrow here. Where's the arrow pointing from? Earth, our point of view, right? So at December solstice, we see the sun south of Earth. That doesn't mean like, well, let me just leave that there. South from the center of Earth. And how do I know? Because Earth's spine, the spine of Gaia, the southern tip, is leaning towards the sun at that time as best she can. And this means summer solstice for the southern hemisphere, winter solstice for the northern hemisphere, for places like Richmond, California, Jerusalem. And the sun is born out of the longest night, right? Why of a virgin? Well, let's show that another time. Capricorn, Aquarius, Pisces are southern signs coming back towards the north until the sun is due east of the center of Earth. And the sun is on the cross, passing over the celestial equator east. And so we call it Easter. You know, these glyphs that we use to depict the signs, people don't really know when they came in or where from. But what I've shown in my work, and this is kind of a talk for another time, they are great teachers of sacred astronomy. They are complete tropical, astronomical glyphs, sigils. Right, like this Aries glyph, it does not look like the so-called Aries constellation, which I prefer to call the Ram, because signs and constellations are very different things. Whether you're speaking sidereal zodiac or tropical zodiac, tale for another time. But as you can see, the Aries glyph does not look like the Ram in the sky. I mean, to be fair, Anna's glyph, which we utilize circles and lines only, is different than like the one that most people draw. This would be more like a common thing. And if I truncate that and slice it in half, that kind of looks like the Ram constellation. I mean, maybe it also looks like, that ram's horn that is blown. But we need two of them to do the Aries glyph. What? I mean, fascinatingly, that thing looks a little bit more like bunny ears. Happy Easter, friends. So is this why the bunny? No, because the bunny's fertile. In technical terms, they hump a lot and reproduce. And this is why the eggs, you may know that bunnies are mammals. And while mammals do certainly utilize the reproductive truth of eggs, those eggs always stay inside and are fertilized there. Yeah. Bunnies give birth to bunnies, not chickens. And yet we are hiding eggs at this time and using this bunny avatar as its Easter's spirit guide. You know, just as for many modern people, Christmas is not about Christ and the birth in the manger. It's about Santa Claus and his sleigh. And you can find transmissions of mine that will show you the Santa myths in the sky. Now we're going to talk about the myths of the Christ. So what a strange thing that we went from this Christ on the cross, the Son on the cross, which I hope you just saw astronomically, to that bunny and the eggs thing. Well, here's an image of, the 8 stations of the year from what's now called the pagan tradition, right? The equinoxes and the solstices, the cross quarters in between, right? And spring equinox, which really we should say March equinox, is called Ostara, right? After who? After Oester. And some will take this back to Ishtar and to Inanna. Although Ishtar and Inanna, these are words for Venus. If we think about Venus as morning star, that's seen in the east. Right now, as I'm recording this in 2020 at Easter, Venus is in the west. Oeste. Now let's talk about este, east. Or Esther, okay, which means east, friends, like literally. And this is the goddess of the spring and fertility, hence the eggs and the bunnies, right? But Germanic, this means the dawn. Okay, well, where does dawn happen? In the eastern horizon, yeah? When the sun crosses the horizon. That's the daily cross, okay? I showed you the yearly cross just before. Other attributes, renewal, of course, because the sun rises in the east after its journey through the underworld. Eggs and bunnies, right? So that's not a Christian thing, as you probably know. The empire, right? The Roman Empire, who had taken Christ as the, empire's religion, didn't completely eradicate the traditions of the peoples that they eradicated, but rather integrated and incorporated them, which is a much more genius way of takeover, right? Let's not get too political there, although I would say we should probably be looking around with very open eyes right now. Anyway, so this has nothing to do with Christ on the cross. Well, it does if you consider Christ the sun and the cross the horizon, or more importantly, why the dawn, why Uestra? Because east, friends, east. So that is what's happening here. And what's in a word? Everything, because magic spells are spelled with letters. East, So let me show you the truth that here with the sun passing over the celestial equator at the cross of the ecliptic and the equator in this one place, the Aries equinox point, which is east of the center of the earth where we are all connected. So now let me show you what the ram's glyph truly is. When you sit and watch the eastern sky, and especially from the equator where I created this animation using the brilliant free software called Stellarium, but I noticed this first with my eyes in space with my face, sitting one night that became day on the house of the sun, Haleakala in Maui. And I sat and I gave myself to the east this night with a lot of blankets, and I watched what the eastern sky does. And I noticed, wow, stars that rise north of east. Well, let me just say that the Pisces constellation looks a lot more like the Aries glyph than the Aries constellation. Stars that rise north of the east head to the north, and south of east head to the south. And then, like the horns of the ram, they hook around to set in the west. But if you take the ground away, you would see the Pisces glyph with that horizontal line representing the horizon. But this is the ram's horn. Let's watch it one more time. So again, it's interesting that the Pisces, or the fishes constellation, looks like the Aries glyph, while the Aries constellation, the ram constellation, does not. This is the Aries glyph. Notice that motion of the sky. The ram's horn, the eternal fountain of youth. Why? Because east is the place of the new beginnings. Don't believe me? Watch a sunrise. So, of course, we begin our years as astrologers who are still tuned in and tuning more into the sacred astronomy of the thing. Of course, we begin our years when the sun is due east of the center of the earth on the cross of matter. The sun on the cross, because east is the place of new beginnings. Okay, so from a northern hemisphere perspective, yes, I can say that this is spring equinox, the Aries ingress, which, unlike Christmas or January 1st or Easter, is a moment in time, and it is the moment that the sun from the center of the earth where we are all connected is due east. East is the place of new beginnings, the rise. And yes, in the northern hemisphere, this means light now overcoming night, days be growing longer than nights do, yeah? Well, that's not true for the southern hemisphere, but it is true for the entire globe. That this is the sun on the cross passing over the celestial equator. That cross is due east of the center of the earth. Easter, Passover, the door with the ram's blood to protect the youth. Why the youth? It's the beginning of the year. You feeling me? This is the sacred astronomy of Passover, of Easter, perhaps transmitted in more words than necessary. But, I like to teach pace. These are things that astrology has forgotten, right? And that's my devotion, is to return the witness of nature, which I call sacred astronomy, back to our practice. Because if we can remember the roots of the rules and the proofs of the equations we use, we will be having a much more intimate experience of, and therefore expression of, their correspondences. Astronomy is the quantity of the heavenly happenings, that which we can measure. Correspondences is the quality of that. It's immeasurable. And astronomy, the sacred science, the high art, is the bridge between the two. The circles and the lines, spirit and matter. Okay, so the ram, why the ram? Because the eastern sky is the horns of the ram, the fountain of youth. And I am implying something here that some of you will hear. That's basically an objection to, in a way, what we accept as the beginning of the zodiac. We say that the zodiac was born from a sidereal tradition. The Babylonians were keeping this solely lunar calendar, and they aligned these 12 signs to track the months, right? The 12 months of the year through the constellations. That's very hard to do, by the way, when you're looking at the sun. There's an interesting part. It's very hard to do when you're using a 354-day year. There's an interesting thing. And that we contribute all this Aries and this Ram stuff because of that Ram constellation. What I'm saying is that that Ram constellation didn't come from some sidereal thing. It just happened at a time when the sidereal signs were very closely related to the tropical signs and the ram's horn, because that is the shape of the sky every day in the east, the fountain of youth. And so now we connect this sign we called Aries to when the sun is traveling through the sign that begins the cusp of Pisces and Aries, due east of the center of the earth, where the sun passes over the equator, moving north. And the earth is moving north through space, but that's a tale for another time. So Easter, Passover, ram's blood, because the sun is passing over the equator, right? In the east, Easter, which has the shape in the eastern sky every day, not just now, of the ram's horns, the fountain of youth, new beginnings. And because that point of the tropical zodiac, which is a directional phenomenon based what? On Gaia's spine, which always points north and south. In fact, defines north and south. That's true north and south, not magnetic north and south. That's a different thing. So don't try to know north with a compass. Know north with the star Polaris in our day and age. Know north with where your shadow is pointing at midday, the shortest shadow of the day. True north. In the southern hemisphere, your shadow is pointing due south in the middle of the day. Okay, either way, we get a meridian line. The shortest shadow of the day is north-south. The sun is due east of the center of Earth when it visits the point that in every moment forever is due east of the center of the Earth, which we in the tropical zodiac, the directional zodiac, call the cusp of Pisces and Aries. East. And east is the place of new beginning. So the point that is east of the center of the earth is like the rising sign or the ascendant for the entire globe. So not only can I say that this is the chart of the beginning of the year, and again, I have this cast not for Richmond or the Greenwich Meridian. I have this cast more from a global perspective. We call this the natural zodiac, with Aries at the where you would usually put an ascendant. Why? Because it's east of the center of the earth. So it's like the ascendant for the whole world. This is like the sunrise of the year from that perspective, even though it means autumnal equinox for the southern hemisphere, east, or the sun on the cross. We've brought in all this sun moon stuff. And this year is so imperative. This time, we're in a window of time, 1982, 2001. 2020, so imperative because we also have the sun on the galactic cross. So I want you to check out my movie called 2020 Revelations at GeminiBrett.com, where I'll also show you that this east point, the cusp of Pisces and Aries, and where we are, this was 1 BC, which I prefer to call BP, before Pisces, because this is when the east point had precessed from the age of the bull through the age of the ram to the young lamb, the son of the lamb, if you will, the good shepherd, the Lamb of God. See that young ram image? Just like Moses killed people for worshiping a golden calf, not a golden bull, a golden calf, because we were at the end of the age of Taurus at that time, and we precess backwards through the constellations or through the sidereal signs, okay? So the young, the lamb was born, who would become the fisher of men, the fisher king, for doing these loaves and fish miracles and such. Where are we in that scene now? The east point then first aligned to a star of the fish. Here's today. No, this is an image of when the dawning of the age of Aquarius will be full in effect. And this is all happening because of the third motion of Earth, which is called axial precession by the astronomers today. It's also a tale for another time. So if you want to see that, head over to GeminiBrett.com. you will find a free teachings page, and you can check out the movie called 2020 Revelations, where I will provide some astronomical support for the strange thing that I'm about to say, which is that this is the second coming. I have no idea what that means. It's not just this year, but we're kind of culminating in something that's been happening for some time and punctuated by solstice eclipses in 1982, 2020 to come on June solstice, and especially in 2001. So I'll tell you right now that I'm not surprised how weird things are right now, because this is time for the cross. This is time for resurrection. This is a death of an old world and the beginning of a new world, or as other cultures would call that, a new sun. That doesn't mean I'm not scared and worried, but I'm also encouraged. So you'll see some interesting biblical prophecy in the sky in that 2020 Revelations movie. I am, said Christ, and you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the Mighty One and coming on the clouds of heaven. I'll show you what that is. And then I'll show you how it's painted with the apotheosis of George Washington becoming a god on the ceiling of the Capitol building. And if you want to pursue that, there's another free movie on my site called Washington Deciphered, the Star Mysteries of DC, which I made years ago about these mysteries, these turning of the ages. But before I had learned about Easter, and before I had understood the power of the coming eclipse on June solstice 2020, which I will say is the most powerful astronomical and therefore astrological gateway of your life. Actually, second most, because the one in 2001 was even stronger that year when the world changed. And I say we change it again in the way that we wish to see the world behave. The time is now. We are the ones we've been waiting for. It is time for a resurrection. Happy Easter, friends. See you in space. You know, actually, let me say one more thing. You will also find a donate button at GeminiBrett.com. If you feel like you've received something here and would like to give back, please do. Please fuel the spacecraft of my explorations. But your energy here, your participation, your support, whether you're watching this live on Facebook or on YouTube or Vimeo later, your comments really fuel this thing. So thank you. But if you've got something to give and you'd like to support economically, there's a donate button at GeminiBrett.com. I'd sure appreciate anything you might give. The greatest way you could give would be honoring me with the opportunity to tune into the song of your soul, whether through an astrological session. So at GeminiBrett.com, you can book a consultation. Tune into this resurrection as it aligns to your own geometry, your own soul song, or you can also do it musically, which you can read more about at the Work With Me page, the Song of the Soul at GeminiBrett.com. So thanks again for tuning in, friends. Happy Easter to you. Let us be fertile. What would we want to produce now? I see that it is 12:12, the perfect time to stop. I'll see you in the mysteries.